Everyone. So today we're going to pop right into chapter 15 over unemployment. Now, unemployment ultimately is one of the most important concepts in economics. This has to do with how many people are able to find jobs, how many people are looking for jobs and not able to find jobs, and what's the structure of the economy and what is the structure of jobs we have available. So how do we measure unemployment? It's sort of the first question we have, because we can understand that unemployment as someone doesn't have a job. And there's more to it than that. What if someone's not interested in having a job? What if someone's not interested, or someone is retired, or what if someone is going to college? So there's a bunch of things that inform whether or not someone is actively looking for a job, whether or not they can't find a job even though they're actively looking, or whether people are deciding that they're just tired and they can't find a job even as they try. So these questions inform how we try to understand and measure unemployment. And to do this, we start off with what we call the labor force. And the labor force is the total number of workers, including both the employed and the unemployed. And this is out of the adult population. So the total number of workers, including both the employed and unemployed. And part of this will come down to, we'll put this in the context of the entire adult population to give us what we call a labor force participation rate. But before getting to that, the unemployment rate then is simply the percentage of the labor force that is unemployed. So UE equals number of unemployed over the labor force times 100. Easy enough, straightforward math. So just for example, let's say you have 1 million people unemployed and a labor force of 10 million people times 100, you wind up with a 10% unemployment rate. Again, as we mentioned, labor force participation rate, this is the percentage of the adult population that is in the labor force. So the labor force participation rate is simply labor force divided by the adult population times 100. And in this link in the PowerPoints online, you can find, and it'll take you to a video by Marginal Revolution University, which will get in depth and more serious explanation of labor force participation rate. Another aspect of this is the natural rate of unemployment. And the natural rate of unemployment is simply the normal rate of unemployment around which the unemployment rate fluctuates. Now, this might be strange, right? Maybe we want a 0% unemployment rate, right? Like, why wouldn't we want everyone to have a job that wants a job? Well, the answer is yes, but actually, and typically an economy has some degree of standard unemployment, and that standard where the economy normally is, that is what we call the natural rate of unemployment. So in the United States, the natural rate of unemployment is typically 3.5% to 4%, and we'll talk about things that determine and influence what this natural rate is. Finally, we have another aspect of unemployment, which is cyclical unemployment. And this is the deviation of unemployment from its natural rate. And the reason this is called cyclical is this has to do with whether or not the economy is booming or whether it's in a bust period. So when the economy is booming and you're below the natural unemployment rate, that is to some degree an aspect of cyclical unemployment. The real concern is when you go through an economic crisis and you deviate significantly upwards from the natural rate of unemployment. So for example, currently today, the United States is struggling with about 10% unemployment rate. Similarly, back in the recession of 07 and 08, we had 7, 6, 8% unemployment. These are forms of unemployment that deviate along with the economic cycle. So how does unemployment in the United States look like? And what does it actually measure? Does it measure what we want it to? Well, simply put, if we look at figure 1, this is a good breakdown of how the unemployment rate looks in the United States. There's a labor force of 155 million people in the United States. And of this 155 million people, 142.5 million were employed and 12.5 million were unemployed in 2012. Now notice we're still in a recovery period at this point. So we were just exiting the recession of 07 and 08. So this was a little bit larger percentage than it was previously or during a better period. Currently today, the numbers are much higher because we're in the midst of the COVID crisis. Now, the adult population, though, note this, 243.3 million people are in the adult population, which tells us that 88.3 million people are not in the labor force. Now, you might be like, wow, how can the country be functioning if only, say, we're looking at like 60% of the population are involved in the labor force? The answer is a couple of reasons. One, a lot of these individuals are retirees, right? So when you're retired, you're done, you're exiting the labor market. So, of course, retirees are outside that market. Additionally, we have a lot of younger college students that are full-time college students, and that takes them outside the labor force. And additionally, you have military who are not included in this. And also note, though, that we have a group of people not included in these numbers called discouraged workers. And discouraged workers are individuals who would like to work but have given up looking for a job. If you want kind of a goofy, silly example of this, for a relatively negative note, this is your friend in high school that's just like, no one's ever going to date me. I'm giving up looking. Like, I'm going to be single forever. And so, like, blah, 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 blah. Discouraged workers are basically unemployment version of that. It's you've been trying to find a job, you haven't been able to find one, and instead of continuing to look, you just give up and resign yourself. You would take a job if it came your way, but the effort to get one, given your prior results, is just not worth it. So these individuals are not factored into the labor force. Now, we have a few measures of unemployment. So at the base level, we have what we call U1, which is persons unemployed 15 weeks or longer as a percent of the civilian labor force. This includes only very long-term unemployed. And in 2012, this number was about 4.2%. To give you an example of what this looks like, these are individuals who are West Virginia coal miner towns, coal industry has left, or coal industry in eastern Kentucky has left. This is the kind of group of people that fall into this. These are people that are caught in structural transitions and have not been able to find new jobs, or jobs have left their community and have not been able to fill that. This is typically a long-term unemployment because it is difficult to get out of that structural system. U2 factors in people who just completed temporary jobs as a percent of the civilian labor force. This excludes people that have left their job. So basically, this is seasonal employees or employees that sign 6-month contracts, 3-month contracts. Then you have total unemployed as a percent of the civilian labor force. This is our official unemployment rate. This is 7.9% in 2012. And again, in the midst of COVID, this number's gone up to over 10%. In a good year, in a good time, it is typically 3.5%. And then U4, total unemployed plus discouraged workers as a percent of the civilian labor force plus discouraged workers. This is typically seen as the ideal measurement, an improved measurement, because it factors in really those that are unemployed but are simply just not looking. And then U5, this attaches individuals that are what we consider marginally attached workers, and they're people who are currently neither working nor looking for work, but indicate they want and are available for a job and have looked for work in some recent past. And discouraged workers are marginally attached workers who've given a job market related reason for not currently looking for a job. And just finally, persons employed part-time for economic reasons are those who want and are available for full-time work but have settled for a part-time schedule in lieu of this. So these are ways we consider overall unemployment. Now, you might be wondering, if U4 and U5 are considered superior to U3 in understanding the unemployment of the United States, why don't we use those measurements? Well, the answer is actually a pretty simple political one. Who wants to be the politician that increased unemployment overnight just by changing the measurement? Right? Because U4 is a larger percentage than U3, and U5 is a larger percentage than U4. For that reason, the United States sticks with U3 because there'd be a political cost to swapping it, but academics potentially pay attention to, or academics prefer to pay attention to U4 and U5. Now, there's some important questions for unemployment. How long are the unemployed without work? This is a little bit of a paradox. In reality, most spells of unemployment are short, and most employment observed at any given time is long term. What does that mean? Well, the reason is simply this. If you leave your job, you'll be briefly unemployed. You'll be in a brief period of transition, and ultimately that leaves you on the unemployment rolls. However, people that leave their jobs to find other jobs are usually out of the job market or not employed for a brief amount of time. So a lot of people are unemployed, but that spell is very quick, and so they move through. However, for a much smaller percentage of people that will be unemployed in a given year, their unemployment is a structural concern. And we'll explain what we mean by structural unemployment in a second. What that means is that their experience and their unemployment is a long-term series of consequences. So, for example, say that you have 2% of the country are unemployed because of jobs lost in steel mills, jobs lost in other blue-collar jobs and manufacturing jobs. Those individuals will not likely get jobs quickly in their communities and are having a difficult transition. However, a large percent of the population may be going through service industry or financial or accountants who may get laid off and quickly cycle into a new job. So we might have a much larger percentage of the population moving through the rest of the unemployment measurement, but it's going through so quickly that most people are then getting jobs. So just to give you an example, if the United States natural rate of unemployment is, say, 4%, and let's say that you have 2.5% structural unemployment or long-term unemployment, the other 1.5% may be very well new people every single month, which means that most months there's new people in the what we'll call frictional unemployment in a moment. They will move quickly in and out of frictional unemployment, while structural unemployment, that 2.5%, stays the same people over the period of time. So what's it this way? UE never falls to zero. Instead, it fluctuates around the natural rate, and there's several different forms of unemployment, and those several different forms explain why. Frictional unemployment, this is what we just mentioned. This results because it takes time for workers to search for the jobs that best suit their taste and skills. This is unemployment because job searches can be like dating. You're trying to figure out what company is going to work for you, what companies are trying to figure out who's going to work for them. When you get towards the end of your college career, right, this will be something that you're going to be faced with, is you'll be sitting here and like, do I have a job already lined up, or am I going to be looking for a job? There will be a brief spell of unemployment there, likely. Structural unemployment, meanwhile, this is what we've been talking about with steel mills and coal miners. This is the number of jobs available in some labor markets insufficient for everyone who wants one. And this is usually a result of economic changes in the quality of jobs and candidates. So some key examples here of structural issues, I mentioned coal miners and steel mills. That's where their markets have declined and the amount of people that had those jobs is still much greater. Other examples include auto workers. GMC is trying to cycle to making more and more electric cars. The way you make an electric car relies much more on things like electrical engineering and robotics instead of auto workers. And so one of the groups caught in this transition are old-fashioned gasoline engine auto workers that run and operate auto plants. So that's a structural change in the economy caused by new changes in technology that are shifting the demands of GM for who they employ. Another example is lawyers. Lawyers actually have a fairly high unemployment compared to other higher level educations. And part of the reason why is because it is a flooded market where there's a large number of lawyers necessarily versus the jobs available for attorneys. Why is frictional unemployment inevitable? Well, the long story short here is that firms are always changing what kind of labor they need, as well as labor also searching for better jobs. So if Apple's firing, that means Dell's hiring. Similarly, sectoral growth and shifts. Example, Hyundai's growth and Chrysler's decline has led to a shift. So as Chrysler in Detroit is on the decline, Hyundai growing in Hyundai's factories in the United States. So for example, there's a Kia factory in southern Georgia, and Kia is owned by Hyundai. Those plants are hiring while jobs are being lost in other areas. So these sectoral growths and shifts, there are aspects of this structural unemployment where people are moving to other places and moving to other jobs. So public policy and job search. So one of the things we can do is we can possibly create programs that help reduce this frictional unemployment. So while it's inevitable, it doesn't mean it's unchangeable. The levels are unchangeable. So government programs facilitating job search can reduce unemployment levels by providing information on job openings and facilitating skill placement and retraining. There are criticisms of this, though. These might be like, great, government job offices should work great. And in many ways, this is what countries like Sweden and the UK. However, private firms usually provide most of the job training anyways, so there's an argument that public training is not necessary. There's also an argument that we have things like Monster.com and Indeed.com, private solutions to the problem of job search and job. there's a little bit of complication here, because just because you have private firms doing most of the job training does not necessarily mean that anyone can get into those private firms. For example, you have to have an accounting background in order to get an accounting job. You can't just go to a firm, get hired as an accountant, and them train you how to do accounting. So there is a question of, do public resources provide the ability to retrain people and recycle people into other industries by providing them at least the basic skills required to transition into those industries where they might not otherwise have had those skills? Unemployment insurance, a government program that partially protects workers' income when they become unemployed. This helps create frictional unemployment. And the reason why is that while this partially protects workers' incomes, and while it does provide a avenue of, again, protection for workers, it does disincentivize a quick job search, because the pressure is not on you to immediately find a job. You still have some revenue stream. It's helpful, but there are questions and concerns. Does unemployment insurance prolong people's job searches? Typically, what you'll probably find is that job searches, this unemployment insurance doesn't really impact those who are high wage earners, because the wages they lose by staying on unemployment insurance are significantly greater than the unemployment insurance alone. But there are questions at the lower end of whether or not unemployment insurance disincentivizes longer term job search. Now, there are other things that can affect the market, and we do have structural concerns. For example, a minimum wage law can introduce structural problems. A minimum wage law, if you remember from earlier chapters, is a price floor mandating a specific level of pay for all workers. If the wage is kept above the equilibrium level for an extended period of time, this will create structural unemployment. Now, you might be wondering, wait, how does this create structural unemployment? How does minimum wage laws create structural unemployment? Let's pop over here and look at our market example for a moment. If you remember, the law of supply tells us that as the price goes up, the quantity supplied increases. Similarly, it tells us that as the price increases, the quantity demanded goes down. There's no reason to presume that labor supply and labor demand should function particularly different. So if you have a minimum wage law which prevails over the equilibrium, then presumably you're incentivizing an increase in the quantity supplied and decrease in the quantity demanded. And this gap, this surplus of labor created by a minimum wage, well, what's a surplus of labor? Unemployment. So that's one of the key questions here is, are policies intended to help workers beneficial to workers, or is it actually detrimental and causing more problems? Now, more research has been done, and we're finding out that perhaps the details are not as dramatic for increasing minimum wage laws, but that gets into questions such as elasticity, which you will explore in microeconomics. But notably, this is different than unemployment resulting from a job search. This results from the fact that the institutional or structural factors of the marketplace are affecting individuals' unemployment. Now, there's other things that influence structural unemployment. For example, unions and collective bargaining have an influence on structural concerns in the market. So a union is a worker association that bargains with employers over wages, benefits, and working conditions. And collective bargaining is the key tool they use to negotiate these benefits. Collective bargaining is the process by which unions and firms agree on the terms of unemployment. And the way they do this is basically the union negotiates for the entire work base. And what we mean by that is that the union is a representative for every worker in the firm. Now, a strike, this is the organized withdrawal of labor from a firm by a union. And this is their key retaliation if firms do not listen to their concerns or interests. So a strike would be that firms walk out, they exit, employees walk out, they exit the firm, and they hold off on going to work. Ultimately, the firm doesn't like this because, of course, that means no one's working. That means the firm is losing money. The firm, of course, can insist on not paying. The unions also typically build up reserves of cash to pay workers in the meantime in the midst of a strike battle. Now, as something to note here, though, this is a little comic in your textbook. Gentlemen, nothing stands in the way of a final accord except that the management wants profit maximization and the unions want more moolah. This basically gets at the point that firms and unions fight over the same thing. Both prefer to have more money. Unions' roles are largely a function of national laws. In the U.S. National Labor Relations Board, this is something created by the New Deal in the 30s. This is who determines the relationship. And the power of unions is highly debated, particularly right-to-work laws, which provide workers the right to not join a union. So, for example, Georgia is a right-to-work state. And basically what that means is that if your company or business has a union, you are not forced to join the union. You can go to work and work independently of the union. However, there is a catch-22 here. That inherently weakens the union, right? Because the union's strength comes from the fact that all employees are members of it. It negotiates for all employees. So an employee can't unilaterally work against the union. So are unions good or bad for the economy? There's a lot of criticisms of them. Basically, the main one is they're basically a cartel, and they have all the associated problems with a cartel. And a cartel, again, is basically saying they have monopolized the labor supply. There's a lot of corruption issues, and there's competitiveness problems. A key point in pace, you should look up presidents of the AFL-CIO. Several have been arrested on corruption charges over the past few years. And ultimately, another aspect of this is unions often rely on kind of compulsory of individuals and employees to pay them and fund them in order to provide the benefits and services. Where this gets crazy is, for example, in states like California, all public officials pay the union fees for the teachers union. So that means if you're a police officer who doesn't necessarily benefit from the teachers union, you still pay to the teachers union in California. So these are the issues and concerns that arise when discussing unions. However, advocates make the point that they're necessary to offset the market power of firms in hiring. So workers are forced to move or not work if they refuse to accept wages in company towns or other small communities. So where the company and businesses are a outsized influence on the community, unions can provide a useful counterbalancing act by unifying workers and offsetting the fact that these owners have effectively a monopoly on jobs in a town. And to be fair, if you look at the history, unions accomplished a lot of good, particularly during the Industrial Revolution, the early 1900s and the early 20th century. So there is a place for unions, and the question is, how do we figure out what that place is and balance it with other concerns? Just another example, Germany has a system where unions sit on the board along with board members and executives, and it's a fairly collaboratory, but there's also no national unions like there are in the United States. So unions are firm specific in Germany. So where does this leave us? Well, firms have been looking at ways to try to circumvent the questions of profit maximization and also caring for workers. And efficiency wages has been one of the big ways they've considered doing this. And efficiency wages are above equilibrium wages paid by firms to increase worker productivity. So Walmart, for example, has recently called to increase the minimum wage as they've increased their own wages. So I believe now the entry wage at Walmart is like $12 with a possible getting to $13 or $14. Now you might be like, wait, why are firms that are dependent on lower wage workers shifting so much to paying higher income? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Most of them have to do from the firm's perspective that there are benefits and efficiencies gained by taking care of your workers. First off is worker health. Higher income workers have better access to healthcare. They have better access to healthier foods. And by being healthier, they are now more productive. Worker turnover also is reduced. And what worker turnover means is this is retaining workers maximizes human capital and doesn't require additional retraining. So when we say we have high turnover, what we're saying is people come to the company and they leave the company very quickly. And when you think about it, right, if someone's only at a company for a month, well, the first 2 weeks are training. So we're talking about a company having to hire people every month, train those people, pay them for training, and then them leaving quickly. So if you can pay them higher wages, that incentivizes workers to stay with the firm, and that maximizes their skill sets, that maximizes their training, and that means you don't have to constantly be retraining. There's another aspect of this, worker quality. You can retain and attract higher quality workers if you are willing to pay your workers more than your other competitors. So again, there's an aspect of the theory of efficiency wages that you are paying for the best and you are offering a fair compensation in return for attracting the best talent. And finally, there's another aspect of this, which is worker effort. And it's if workers believe they're fairly compensated, this will improve their performance. This argument is based on the fact that almost all workers have some degree of autonomy of their effort, and this enables a higher performance. So if you feel you're fairly compensated, then you're willing to put more effort into your job. One thing I want to add to this, and is another aspect of this, particularly for a firm like Walmart, one of Walmart's biggest losses is what we call asset loss. And basically what that means is Walmart loses a lot of inventory because employees or shoppers are stealing their inventory. And so one of the ways to combat this is firms like Walmart and other companies can raise and pay higher wages, and presumably as part of worker quality and worker effort, this will reduce the loss of inventory due to people stealing it. So how long do we work? This is an interesting case study. If you're interested in what this video is by Marginal Revolution University. And the video is on how long do we work till retirement. It's a great little study of explaining why the labor force participation rate and the labor force has changed over time. And it also is an interesting, fascinating video explaining why people work until they retire or how long they work. In conclusion, unemployment may be the single most important variable in economics. After all, it tells us if people are able to create value, earn livings, and the rate of change in the economy. But there will always be some unemployment for structural and frictional reasons, and we only have so many measurements for this kind of unemployment. But it profoundly influences how we organize our economy, and so it's important we consider unemployment at all times. And it poses a fascinating question to us. What determines if an economy is healthy or successful or doing well? Is it the income of people that have jobs, or is it the amount of people that have jobs of decent income? So these are questions that this chapter poses to it. This is a core part of economics. Reducing and fighting unemployment is one of the core goals of all economic policy. And as we will find out in our later chapters, we're going to explore policies and strategies and the tools utilized by policymakers to combat unemployment. All right, thank you guys. Until next time, see you around.